We created this fully custom silver and aquamarine pendant totaling over 4.5 carats of aquamarine. It looks so simple, but it was one of the most complex projects I've ever made. So let's break it down. So the client originally sent me these sketches, which were actually like really well done. So that's what we used to, base the design off of. Now that I knew what she wanted, I actually recreated the necklace in Play-Doh. Yes, Play-Doh. It is so simple, but it's so efficient just to get like a general idea of what she wants and seeing it in real life with real life measurements. Because once it's recreated in Play-Doh, I can then go in and take the measurements and recreate that in 3D design. So it's so much easier, it's so much faster. So once we got the approval, we actually had a team meeting and we had to basically deconstruct the piece to figure out how to rebuild the piece. It's a lot more complicated than you think for a number of reasons. So let's dive deep. Number one, she didn't want a chain, she wanted a tube. And so that adds on to a lot of complexity. The very first thing is we had to find out the dimensions of the tube. So we actually started with a thickness of 4 millimeters because what I was afraid of is that the flowers themselves would look a lot larger than the chain itself. And so it looked like basically like a little stringy wire with big clumps on the end, and it wouldn't look proportional and it wouldn't be aesthetic. And so we started off with a much thicker wire at like 4 millimeters. The problem with that was that 4 millimeters was so heavy that it wouldn't be comfortable for her to wear. Then we went down to 3 millimeters, then we went down to 2, and I believe at the end it's about 2 to 2.5 millimeters thick. So it is a lot lighter. It's also a lot less rigid. Having a much thicker wire, she wouldn't have been able to take it on and off because the wire just wouldn't bend. And so we ended up with a much thinner wire. The second problem was that we had to figure out a way of joining the piece cohesively to the flower because silver is not like gold. When you're joining two pieces of gold, all you need to do is heat the exact spot that you want the pieces to join. When you're working with silver, you have to heat the complete piece, which is next to impossible when you're working on such a big design. And so you would basically have to heat the whole thing. And by the end of it, guaranteed the prongs would have been so small that they would have just collapsed. And so it wasn't really an option for us to heat the entire piece because it was just not going to work. What I ended up doing was we created a system where we would join both pieces through a riveting setting. Riveting is where basically we took the flower and on the back of the flower we created a post. The post was then put through the wire and then hammered down and then laser tacked around it to like make sure that it was really in place. So this was kind of like a very elaborate way of joining the pieces without requiring a very intensive amount of flame, which would have just made the piece collapse. I really wanted to make sure that the piece was aesthetic from the front and the back. I don't like doing sloppy work. Everything is in the detail. That is why if you look at the back, the finishing is like perfect. The last problem that we actually encountered was literally because we weren't strong enough. We wanted to use 2.5 millimeter wire, but nobody had long enough wire because we needed like 20 inches to wrap all around the neck and go down. So everyone was like short of like 5-6 inches that we could buy locally. And so normally what you would do with wire is that you would string it through these like little holes and you would pull the wire and it would get longer and longer and smaller. So ideally we would have taken, the 3 millimeter wire and like wrung it out, but we literally weren't strong enough to pull the wire because pulling 3 millimeter wire is a lot harder than you'd think. So we actually had to throw that out the window and just import the wire, the length that we wanted, just custom cut. So in the end, working with wire is a lot more complicated than just like a standard necklace chain. So once we figured out how we were going to build it, we did it in 3D. So this is really where I, made the general shape of the flower. I didn't want it to be very rigid. I want it to be more organic. So all the petals are different shapes. They all kind of twist in a different way and they're all different lengths. So it has a very organic feel because if everything was very like cookie cutter symmetrical, I don't think it would have looked as nice. And so we kind of played around with different, petal shapes, added the pave. I tried to stay true to, the images that she originally sent me. So kind of like within the same shapes. But yeah, we did the 3D. And then once we do it in 3D, we basically print it and cast it and move on to production. Once we mounted the piece and everything was joined together, we then gave one final polish and brought it to the stone setter. In order for the stone setter to set the stones, having a calibrated selection is really important. And what I mean by calibrated is that all the gemstones need to be perfectly measured in order to fit. Because what happens is that a lot of times when we use diamonds, all the diamonds are calibrated, right? And the cuts are very nice. But when you're working with gemstones, a lot of the time gemstones will be a little bit less uniform. A lot of the times they'll have a lot thicker bellies underneath the stone, which means that it's a lot harder for them to set, if at all. And so we really had to go in and measure every single stone, make sure everything was perfect before bringing it to the setter for him to set. Once set, we then did the final polishing. Again, working with silver is very difficult. It is a very soft metal. I personally don't like working in silver because as soon as you polish it, by the end of the day, it's all scratched up and it goes to a very foggy scratch. And so we had to be very, very meticulous when we were polishing to really make sure that like everything was really well done. But yeah, this piece came out beautifully. It was a really fun project to work on because we usually just do a lot of engagement rings, which is very standard. This was a lot more of an elaborate piece. So it was a lot of fun to make. We're really, really excited for the client to see it. I'm sure she's going to love it. The way the piece came out is really beautiful. I love adding this to my portfolio. It's one of those crazy pieces that like we don't always get the pleasure of doing because a lot of clients, they just want like cremation jewelry or they want engagement rings from us. And so it's like kind of like rinse, repeat the same thing all the time. But this was like a one-of-a-kind piece that I love getting. So yeah, if ever you guys have any crazy pieces that you guys want to send me, hit me up. I would love it. My links are down below. Just send me an email. Anyways, my name is Dominic Flux. Let me know what you think about the pendant and I will see you next time. Bye.